Good morning. My name is Larissa Harari. I'm a Rotary Peace Fellow from Brazil, and I'm studying the Duke International and Policy Graduate Certificate. So today I'm going to talk about strategies for international NGOs to support civil society, CSOs, in Kenya. So INGOs, I mean international non-governmental organizations. And how can INGOs better do policies to support CSOs to be more effective? By CSOs, I mean community-based organizations in Kenya, local NGOs, and advocacy groups. And why this topic? Let me start saying that I'm not Kenyan, and I have still much to learn about the country. But I was there for 6 months in 2016, and I was deeply impacted by the organizations and the people I met there while working with educations in slums and remote areas of the country. At the same time, Kenya is a big hub for international development, receiving a lot of aid around the world and mainly for East Africa. So today, it's important to learn about Kenya to know how international development can better work for peace and sustainability. So understanding Kenya is critical. After I graduate from Duke, quite soon, I hope to leverage my experience and research with Kenya to work in international development organizations. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk about why international NGOs need to know how to better support local CSOs. I'm also presenting the challenges that prevent the advancement of locally led development. And at the end, I'll show suggestions on what INGOs can do and be an important partner to empower local CSOs to be more effective, and thus reach sustainable and social outcomes. So why is this topic important? International humanitarian organizations have been concerned for a long time on promoting civil society organizations in developing countries. And there's a general agreement on how best to do it. There have been several international meetings with action plans on how to improve aid effectiveness, more ownership and local partnerships, and increase funding to direct NGOs. So the most notable meetings were the Paris Agreement for Aid Effectiveness in 2005, Accra, and more recently, the Grand Bargain meeting in 2016. If we don't take these actions, the programs won't be as effective and sustainable as we hope for, and countries will not reach the sustainable development goals we have agreed, nor we will overcome structural causes of social problems. Not addressing these issues also perpetuate power imbalances where global North actors continues to almost exclusively dictate the priorities for developing countries' development. So unfortunately, most of these principles are far from being implemented. For instance, the direct funding of 25%, which donors committed to reach until 2020, continues to amount only 3% of tracked international funds. Challenges to implementing this agreed principle are many, but I will focus on two main issues. First, the limitations to resources and funding and the short-sighted view of local knowledge and capacity. So the first issue is the limitation to resources and funding. Kenyan resources come mostly from non-Kenyan sources. INGOs and local CSOs, they compete for the same source of funding. Usually, the donors have complicated compliance requirements that limits the ability of local CSOs to participate on the competition. Local organizations are then subcontracted as service providers and do not participate in developing and designing the priorities. As a sad example that I came across during my research, an INGO, which I won't say the name, was awarded a $44 million grant, but directed only $280,000 to its local counterpart. This INGO, as an intermediary, took most part of the funds to its own operations and transferred just a small percentage, 6%, to this local NGO, not allocating the funds necessary needed to carry on the activities to reach the program objectives. The project had to be canceled mid-course before achieving any results. Another issue is that funding is generally short-term and unpredictable, and its amounts and purposes depends on donors' countries' interests and policy objectives. This turns out the accountability of a program towards the donor and away from the people it matters, and also causes discontinuity and only addresses the surface of social problems. The second issue is the short-sighted view of local knowledge and capacity. There's a lot of investment in capacity building for developing countries, but the capacity delivered tend to be short-term and short-sighted, reactive to current circumstances. For instance, reporting skills or fundraising, they are important, but they do not change the patterns of external dependence. Local organizations are often perceived to lack this accounting and reporting risk management systems needed to satisfy Western donors. As a women's rights activist group put it, CSOs do not lack capacity, but they lack capacity to meet the donor's requirements. At the same time, we have all heard how international development organizations must take into account local knowledge to carry out their programs. But still, existing local capacities and cultural knowledge is often overlooked. In other words, Global South are perceived as objects of development, lacking the agency and the need for the intervention of the Global North. There's still a tremendous culture of we know better that affects the relationship and the trust between those actors, ultimately affecting the possibility of build, sustaining, and lasting peace. But it does not have to be that way. International NGOs have the resources, capacity, and power to influence this pattern. Changes in the way they relate to civil society organizations in Kenya can have a great impact. So I'd like to finish this presentation exploring potential solutions for these challenges, and I know that INGOs can be good partners for development and effectiveness. So one good strategy is a flexible process of grant making. While it starts with donors, I'm now focusing on what INGOs can do. For example, instead of requiring from CSOs a detailed written proposal, INGOs can ask for simple statements of interest and indication of experience. INGOs can also cover for overhead costs, which are not directly related to the programs, freeing the CSOs to exercise their own judgment on how the funds get used. And I really like the participatory grant-making approach. Instead of donors making decisions on how the money gets used, responsibility is shifted to the community and disrupt the sense of passive beneficiary, while encouraging also a culture of accountability to funding decisions made. So the second batch of potential solutions are a holistic approach to capacity development and local knowledge. All communities have knowledge, culture, skills, and networks that must be recognized. So as we, as international NGOs, adopt this approach, ultimately we will show respect for our partners, behave as if we are going into somebody else's house, and leveraging what they know and do best. So ask yourself, capacity on what and to whom? Who delivers the capacity also matters. It's often that INGOs bring outside experts who may lack knowledge of the context and bring some skills that the people already know. So continuing with INGOs with their convening power can foster the collaboration between local organizations to help us operate as a network. We also have to have clear exit strategies while transferring power and agency to local organizations and developing the capacity for the leadership transition. In the end, identify what are the proactive capacities that will help these organizations to prepare for a constantly changing environment, like adaptive leadership, partnership building, and the use of technology, all of which can be critical for CSO's long-term effectiveness. As an example, the Kenyan Community Development Fund was founded with support of Aga Khan Foundation and the Ford Foundation. The interactions between the INGOs and the local organization was a balance between a hands-on and a hands-off approach coupled with a long-term commitment. KCDF carries a strong community-driven development approach and has outstanding results, developing local philanthropy and policy influencing pro-poor programs. And as a US-based example, Mackenzie Scott have been giving unrestricted funds to social justice organizations to address systemic issues of social inequalities, carrying out this principle that they must give away a fortune that was enabled by the system's needing of change. So to improve, we must embrace change. We in the international community, we know there are challenges and that we have to improve. There are patterns of behavior that can hinder local CSOs' effectiveness. But there's also willingness to change. And we already know the potential solutions for that as agreed in the Grand Bargain and Paris Agreements. So then we have to embrace this change and not fearing losing our place in development, because there's a lot of work to be done. This way, we'll all benefit from the collaborative work and impact people's leaving no one behind. So I'd like to finish from this quote from Martin Luther King. Philanthropy is commendable, but it must not cause the philanthropist to overlook the circumstances of economic injustice, which makes philanthropy necessary. Thank you.
To be the moderator for this panel. My name is Catherine Admay. I go by the name Admay. I'm one of the faculty directors for the center based at Duke, and I teach in the International Development Policy program at Duke. So, our panel, as you know, is entitled Rethinking International National Engagement for More Effective Outcomes. What does this mean? True to the conference theme, Peace, Reimagined, Sustaining Justice and Hope for the Future, both Larissa and Nathalia have just challenged us to rethink, reimagine the terms of engagement for international and national actors. Both their presentations, not only the one about rule of law, engaged ideas of justice and also of hope. So, for example, Larissa asked us to think about the power dynamics that can undermine both the partnership and the results for international NGOs working with national CSOs. How can we make space to recognize those power dynamics between these partners and work to actually make them less problematic rather than just accept them as the cost of doing development business? On whose terms should donor money flow from international to national levels? Larissa asked us to see how we shoot ourselves in the foot when we don't value or don't adequately value the very leaders who are closest to the people whose lives we are trying to improve when we invest in development. It is an investment. Will we get more effective and sustainable outcomes if we invest in CSOs led by people whose best resume, what we say in academia, curriculum vitae, are literally vitae, their lives, and the knowledge and the trusted relationships they have? Larissa told us a hopeful story based on work she did alongside inspiring community leaders who have brought her to us today and her back to them, I hope, very soon. Nathalia also had a clear message about effective outcomes hinging on intentional and respectful terms of engagement between international actors and national actors. Her presentation was about hybrid international plus national courts that have been improvised in the international diplomacy, conflict resolution, criminal law, and law of war space before there was an international criminal court, which we now have, called the ICC, in The Hague. The Special Court for Sierra Leone was established on the request of Sierra Leone. The then head of state, the Sierra Leone president, Ahmad Tejan Kaba, wrote a letter to the then Secretary General of the United Nations, Kofi Annan, asking the countries of the UN to help try those responsible for terrible crimes against humanity that had been committed during Sierra Leone's civil war. Why was a national leader reaching out to international leaders for help? What kind of help was forthcoming? Was this help on terms that Sierra Leoneans could be glad about? Was this help that the countries and their publics who funded the special court be glad about? Nathalia asked, how can we build on what went well? Thank you both for the ways that you have expressed the theme of our panel. So as I did last time, I will take the moderator's prerogative of asking the first question. And this one's a challenging one, Larissa. You pointed out very powerfully that the problem for many CSOs is not that they lack capacity, but they lack capacity to do all the things they're currently being asked to do by INGOs who don't properly value their knowledge and relationships. And I saw Simon there nodding strongly when you said that. In other words, CSO leaders have crucial social capital and justified trust. They are able to identify what needs to be done and then get those things done. But I'd like to ask you to consider a problem that international NGOs and donors who support them will be worrying about: the C word, corruption. In any part of the world where there is money, there will be temptations for embezzlement. It is tempting then for INGOs and donors to have demanding protocols around financial reporting and accounting to avoid inviting corruption. How do you suggest relationships between INGOs and CSOs be structured so that local leaders are less likely to pocket funds meant for the people in whose name they are leading? How can we, in other words, not be naive about money flows and the temptations of corruption?
Thank you, Admay, for the question. Is this on? Okay. Yeah, it is a complex question. And I would say that to have equal partnerships does not mean, of course, to give away the financial accountability. So I think the financial accounting still has to be a really important part of this relationship. And INGOs have the capacity and knowledge, even way more than the local organizations, to do this accounting finances, especially to account for the donors' requirements and compliance. But I think financial accountability shouldn't be like a one-size-fits-all solution, because each local organization have their own structures, they have ways of doing things. So INGOs should be flexible to understand how the local organization already do their accounting, and also come in the scene with a trust that they are doing what they are doing because they want the best of the community, and develop this accounting structures to better respond to their realities. So have this flexibility, and but still, of course, maintain this financial accountability, and also not forgetting that corruption, it can be seen only as the local leader that is pocketing out money, but how about the larger institutional corruption that we can find? Maybe it's not even called corruption, but it's the way that INGOs take most of the money, as the example that I shared of the $44 million, and to not address to the final objective of the project. So how this intermediaries and costs can also be seen as a way of diverting the resources out of the people, away from the people.
Yeah, thank you for that. This is what hard questions bring out. Good answers. All right. So Nathalia, you've noted that one way hybrid tribunals have a positive legacy at the national level is the contribution to the court system, both in form of buildings and human resources. A courthouse and detention center, a case management system, trainings for court staff and lawyers and judges. How has this legacy been sustained? Do you have any recommendations for how sustaining the legacy can be baked in, as you said, be intentional to the mandate at the beginning?
So that's part of the challenges, as I mentioned. Resources are scarce, but specifically about sustainability, it all starts with the mandate. So it's important that the designers of the hybrid courts include a specific mandate for the legacy, that is for like trainings and infrastructure. That's the first point. The second point will be to make sure that the resources available for maintaining it over the years. So one idea to do that, considering, again, like the scarcity of resources that maybe the country has or international community, is to create a trust fund. So this trust fund creates an ongoing stream of resources that can be used to keep the trainings going for the prosecutors, in general, the court system, and that will also allow to tailored to the needs, because of course that change over the years, that can be more towards gender-based violence or towards organized crime, depending on the specific moment, and again, the needs of the domestic court system. And to also maintain the infrastructure, so they don't become just like ruins from what it was at some point, a great institution, and keep serving the local people. Additionally, another important aspect will be making sure that the legal system is aligned with international standards. So all these skills that they're acquiring the officials are able to apply them. So the court can help there in making a first concept when they get to the country about the necessary legal reforms to, again, make this the domestic legal system coherent with international standards. And those are like specific factors that can help making it sustainable. And sorry, one last thing that I will add to that. In the case of Sierra Leone, it's important because in these recommendations, for instance, they have to also consider the local context and the culture of the country. And in the particular case of Sierra Leone, is really important because they have a long and widespread traditional courts and traditional legal systems. So bringing them into the conversation about how do we align this with the international law, international human rights standards is key. So the Western legal system is not isolated, what actually serves the people in daily life issues.
Thank you. All right. So in the same format as before, may I ask a question from those of us who are in the house? Thank you.
Thank you. Fascinating presentations. My name is Thiam from Vietnam. I'm currently a Fulbright visiting scholar at Duke University. My question is for Larissa. Now that we have a discourse of localization and locally led development, and we have witnessed such things as aligning their priorities with those of local and host governments, or appointment of locally recruited directors, replacing those foreigners, or even re-register those INGOs at local NGOs. In theory, those localization or locally led development is beautiful and attractive. But in practice, there are some traps or some challenges. And we have some examples of things like those organizations would be subject to more harassment or even persecution from governments, especially in those authoritarian countries. Or in general, those organizations do not work as effectively as before. So I would like to hear the views on this issue, and what should we do to make those localization discourse meaningful, more effectively? Thank you.
Thank you. So did you hear the last part of the question?
Can you read that?
Yes. I might restate some of these longer questions, and I, having asked a long question, I'm sympathetic, but please do at the end give us your basic question. So I think what I heard as the basic question is, there's all these localization initiatives that seem promising, but when you look behind them, they're very disappointing. And how do you manage that?
Yeah, I think one thing you mentioned was when governments can also be a pushback to locally led developments with communities. And Kenya is a interesting case about that, because there has been several setbacks from the government trying to shrinking civic space and trying to limit the ability of the local NGOs to do their work. So I think it's really important that the INGO, as an important stakeholder for development, to be this mediator with government and with local organizations, try to, within the government, build this trust towards local NGOs and try to see the government also as a partner rather than as a potential threat. So I think, of course, this is more easily said than done, but I think seeing all the stakeholders as how to build cooperation and how to get each one of them to do their own strength is what we should try to do as international development. And yeah, maybe something more? Okay.
All right, John, from the world.
Yeah, this is for Nathalia. The question about the legitimacy of a hybrid court within the country and what efforts are made to ensure that everyone accepts the rulings that come from a hybrid court within the country.
Okay, thank you for that question, because that allows me to expand a little bit more on a key issue, that's legitimacy of the court. So in first place, these courts were created as opposed to international tribunals to make them closer to the people, so people will be able to kind of like see how things were done within their own context, not somewhere in usually Western Europe, The Hague, or a city like far away and so remote that people didn't understand where was that. So the first thing is for legitimacy for the hybrid court is to be in town, in the country. And also the staff, it's important that is at least 60% local. So again, they have this sense of ownership over what's happening there. And a third and key factor that the hybrid court of Sierra Leone was the pioneer was the outreach program. This public outreach program was key to go to remote areas and even in the cities, explaining what the court was, what was the mandate, who were the people that was being indicted, who was going to be sanctioned, and when they were sanctioned, what that mean. And also what was really important, especially in the trial of Charles Taylor, the former president of Liberia, was to broadcast the trials. So there were massive meetings where people were able to watch what was happening in all the charges that were being presented against Charles Taylor. As I mentioned, the outreach program in the case of Sierra Leone had problems about funding, but still that's a key factor for legitimacy, and that's why in the future we need to work for ensuring funding. This.
All right. Can I just be sure there's no other questions since you had a chance earlier? All right. Is there any other questions for someone who hasn't had a chance earlier? Yes, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Kim Dixon. I'm a Rotarian and a Return Peace Corps volunteer. Excellent presentations, both of you. Larissa, I had a kind of a follow-up question to Admay's. And it's kind of, the questions are kind of an evolving, almost a different conclusion to your presentation, maybe. I've seen the international NGOs have donors that they have respected and earned the right, to continue with the donations. The CSOs I see are quite often one-offs. So the international NGO comes in, they say, okay, in this little village, this CSO gets to do the work. And I find that those CSOs don't have the accountability to report on the outcomes and the evaluations. They take the money, they might do great work or not, but writing those evaluations, and a lot of times in English, so what's the answer for that? I see the INGOs really do play an important part, although not 80%. But what's the answer there when the CSOs maybe don't have that accountability? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I think there is, as the same thing as before, there needs to be a partnership. So while the CSOs who has knowledge of the community, who has lived experience, as Admay said, they can do the work and reach the constituents and reach impact. INGOs have this accounting and systems that are way more complex and qualified that can respond to the needs that they need. I mean, as international development, we need results, we need metrics, we need to see that our work is doing a good job, because we have a lot of financing and donors that are expecting this feedback. So I think a solution for what you said could be together a partnership that is really a partnership, where the local CSOs do the job, they do the activities, and also, of course, adding to defining the priorities of the activities, which is really important. Not only do the jobs that the INGO is wanting or the donors is hoping to achieve as a policy objective, but have a member of that INGO based on the community that will do this reporting, that will be responsible for that in partnership, in relationships, maybe not day by day, but a really close relationship with the work, so that can have the accountability in this reporting that the INGO expects for.
I think that's part of what you were saying earlier, that the INGOs need to plan to put those components in place, so not expect them from the small, young organizations, but provide it rather than demand it. Yeah.
Technology can help that too.
Yes. Yeah, and technology helps us get the next question.
Yes, this is for Nathalia. Did you see alternative methods about dispute resolution, mandatory mediation, or arbitration as in part of that experience in Sierra Leone? Or do you think, if not, do you think that would be a good addition to the hybrid court system?
Those are awesome questions. So, in the case of Sierra Leone, besides the court, there was a truth commission, which was inspired by the South African model. So it had some like reconciliation approach, which, I mean, not quite mediation, but it led to an alternative way of saying disputes. For lesser grave crimes, these cases were managed by the commission, by the Truth Commission. Of course, it had challenges on legitimacy compared to the tribunal and the type of, let's say, sanctions that the perpetrators will get into the Truth Commission. But still, that show that can be included in the model of this transition mechanism. And that, like, learning from that experience is kind of like a third wave of transitional justice mechanisms, which Colombia is the newest and trendy case, is these alternative methods of certain disputes is embedded inside the tribunal. So my experience working there in the Peace Tribunal in Colombia showed me it's so challenging when you are talking about millions of victims and thousands of perpetrators, how we organize this. But we'll see which results the Tribunal of Colombia can deliver for the rest of the world.
All right. Yeah. Oh, you are there. Mexon.
Thank you so much. My name is Mexon Mapuka. I'm a medical doctor by training, originally from the Central African Republic. I'm one of the Rotary Peace Fellow Class 20. I'm studying Master of Public Health in Applied Epidemiology at the Guinea School of Public Health. So my question is going to Nathalia. Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. So in one of your slides, you talk a little bit about Central African Republic, about the Special Criminal Court. What would you think would be a solution to reduce the political influence in the court? And I do remember that maybe 1 month ago, the court just started to work on some of the cases pending for a while since the Civil War started in 2013. So what would you think about any kind of solutions that would be done in order to reduce the political influence in that? Thank you.
So political interference is always a risk, but and not necessarily just a risk, a reality in many places. So there, besides of course, like trainings and making sure that people understand what the importance of independence of the judiciary, I believe civil society plays an important role of ensuring transparency of the decisions and of ensuring, for example, the appointments of judges and prosecutors and other court officials are according to the law, and they have the qualifications that they need to be there. But also to spread this knowledge in these, raising awareness in the general public about why we need an independent tribunal and why the political interference should not be permitted. Yes, so that will be my recommendation.
Thank you. We have time for one more.
This is for Larissa. In following on TM's question, that local NGOs can be pressured by government or political interests or a clan or tribal interests to how they work or where they focus. How can international NGOs help protect local NGOs from being influenced that way?
I think there's always a mix of interests and power dynamics that always play locally, whether it's the community leader or someone in the community that has more resources that can influence the dynamic. I think it's set that this relationships will always happen. And so how can INGOs limit this influence? I don't know. Should they? Like, should INGOs be interfering on what local communities are interested in? I don't know.
Yeah, I think the question was about what happens when the government is interfering with CSOs, and this phenomenon of government organized NGOs where they're not actually community leaders. And so that the question was, how do you protect community organizations from interference? In other words, not what they want from the government. And how can INGOs be part of protecting come alongside them?
So offering, again, partnerships and building this relationship. So I think one reason why local CSOs can be interfered by governments is because they want access, they also have their interest in the game. So if the local CSOs have the relationships and the network needed to do the work, maybe they won't be as influenced by the governments. I don't know if, yeah.
That's right, that's really great. All right, it's my sorrow now to have to bring this panel to an end. Thank you very much.